Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing you another guides, tips, and tricks video. This is the second one of our perk guide videos. We're talking about perks in Battle Brothers and starting off with the level 3 perks, which is the second line of perks. So, as I said in the previous videos, I will be talking about builds in a separate video. So we're going to be talking about the power of these perks if you're going to take them, if that makes any sense. So in a build that uses a perk like this, that might take advantage of a perk like this, how powerful would that perk be? I'm going to give you a numerical rating from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most powerful, and talk about why I think that. All right, so let's get going. Executioner is the first of these perks. So what does Executioner does? You get an additional 20% damage when you are doing damage to a target that already has an injury effect, like a broken arm. I like this ability. I'm giving it a power rating of 2. I like this, but it's a really narrow set of classes that I would use this on. A very narrow set of builds that I'd use this ability on, and I basically only use this on archers. And here's the rationale for me. Archers, it's really important they do 1 to 2 shots on things that they can kill, things that they care about. The way I use archers in my playthroughs archers are a counter range build, so they're designed to kill enemy archers, particularly enemy crossbows, as soon as possible, or they're designed to kill very, very high priority targets that do annoying movements like orc berserkers, and they're there to fight goblins. If I could one-shot goblins, I would be super happy, and crossbows can almost do that, but not quite. Bows tend to 2-shot, but sometimes you will 3-shot archers, 3-shot goblins with an archer as opposed to 2-shotting it, and the amount of damage your bow does to a goblin almost always puts a wound on them. So they're almost always getting a wound, and I want the next hit to kill it outright. I don't want it to be a 3-shot to kill a goblin. I want it to be a 2-shot to kill a goblin as much as possible with bows. And then the same kind of logic when I'm fighting brigands, when I'm fighting brigand raiders, the archers with those, where I want to kill their crossbows before they get their bullshit super high armor penetration into my guys from their crossbows. I want to remove their crossbows from the board as soon as possible. And the same with berserkers, right? Berserkers have a ton of health, no armor. They take a number of wounds before they get to you. I find Executioner basically makes archers do a better job on the targets that they're supposed to be killing anyways. It makes them more effective. It doesn't do a very nice, for example, Executioner doesn't seem to help me very much on archers versus a number of other targets, but the targets that I absolutely need my archers to be good against, Executioner makes them more good against. And those are goblin archers, orc berserkers, and brigand archer classes, and this seems to be particularly helpful for me, as well as, I guess, noble archers, but any of the other humanoid archers. So I like Executioner because it makes the number of shots it takes me to kill very critical ranged enemies, or just very critical enemies in general, less. It feels like that logic would be good everywhere, but I haven't found that to be true. Remember, no undead enemies can take wounds, so Executioner does nothing against undead targets, but I basically don't use archers versus undead targets. I don't use archers versus skeletons because they take no damage from skeletons, and I only use one archer versus zombies to kill the necromancer, and I don't bring archers versus non-necromancer zombies anyways. So the downside of Executioner is no bonus damage versus things that don't have wounds, but I don't use archers in those scenarios anyways, and I don't bring Executioner on non-archer characters. So it's kind of a weird one to rate because it's super strong in a very, very specific window of builds for me. I've tried it on back rank DPS, the either hybrids or pikemen, and what I found is it just doesn't seem that useful on a number of targets. It just doesn't seem that relevant most of the time. A lot of the times with the other targets I'm fighting, as I said already, undead are immune. Orcs basically don't take wounds until you've done a large amount of damage already to their armor, which means I would rather focus on doing damage to their armor. The brigands often don't have the health that it matters, where a second hit with a pike is probably just as likely to kill them without Executioner in a large number of scenarios, that type of thing. What I found Executioner to be most useful for is when it brings the total number of shots to kill something down an entire shot, and that seems to be this case with archers mostly. All right, let's take a look at Bullseye. Bullseye is similar to Executioner in the sense that it is I'd give this a 1, as in one of the more powerful abilities, but it's super limited where you're going to bring this. I only take Bullseye on my my bow archer classes, my classes that are dedicated anti-ranged fighters, and I do this because it's really important that they hit the target they're designed to hit. Yes, I use scatter a lot to hit targets that I also want to hit, but when I want to shoot an archer and that archer's hiding behind a tree or hiding behind a guy with a shield, I really want it to hit that archer, and this is one of the biggest accuracy boosts I can get to do that. I consider this totally essential on pure archers and totally useless on every other build out there. So I give that a 1. All right, dodge. Again, this might be a controversial opinion. I don't like dodge at all. I give dodge a 5. I give it the lowest power rating out there. I've tried it a couple times. I've never found anything that makes it work. So what does dodge do? Dodge is a 15% bonus to both melee and range defense, which is pretty good. The problem is it's 15% of your current initiative. Initiative isn't a skill I raise very often. It's a kind of expensive skill to raise because every time you raise initiative, you're not raising one of the other skills, and the other skills are all super important. Your primary attack skill, your primary defense skill, fatigue and HP are all super, super important. Resolve is super important, and having some of the off skill is the other defensive skill is sometimes important too. For example, some characters that have melee defense would like a little bit of range defense as well. Initiative to me is almost always the lowest of value, and that is because most of the time, even if you raise initiative a little bit, which is all you can ever afford to raise initiative because the other stats are so important, even when you raise initiative a little bit, you're still not faster than most of the opponents that you would like to be faster than. Goblins are always going to go ahead of you. Mostly the low armored brigands are going to go ahead of you. It's rare to find characters who can be fast enough that the initiative is going to matter. And it's also another one of these things where if 11 of your 12 guys are slower than the enemy and one of them's faster, that's not all that big of a deal. If you could get all your guys faster than the enemy, that would be fairly useful, but that's almost impossible to do in this game. So in other words, your initiative isn't going to be that high. And additionally, the way that dodge works is it's based on your current initiative. As you accumulate fatigue across the course of a fight, which you will do on all of your characters, and the harder the fight, the more true that is. So the longer the fight goes on or the worse the terrain, the more fatigue you're going to accumulate, the less dodge does for you. So across the course of the fight, it gets worse for you. I would entertain a counter argument that on archers in particular, especially in some of the fights like brigand fights, where your archer's goal is to remove as many of the enemy archers as possible as soon as possible. In the early part of that fight, dodge is going to be quite good because you're not going to be fatigued yet, and at that stage in the fight, you're going to be having the most incoming attacks on you because their archers are still alive, and therefore it's giving you good bonus. I can buy that to some extent. What the problem to me comes down to is I don't need this skill then. I have other skills to keep me alive in that scenario, and the scenarios where dodge won't help me, like in a long fight with goblins where it's really not going to be that useful because I'm going to fatigue out on my archers. In the scenario like that, well, I could have been using another skill that would help me there. Basically, not a lot of bonus on a lot of characters, and the scenarios where I could see it being useful aren't scenarios where I have to waste a perk point to win those scenarios. That's my take on it. I'm certainly interested to hear. Some of you guys have builds that really take advantage of dodge, maybe builds that use recover to keep your stamina low, or I could see this being better on a character with iron lungs or something like that. Maybe I could see dodge being kind of situationally useful, but I haven't found a build that I like that takes advantage of it. And anytime I have picked it up on a build, I've regretted it to the point where I just don't do it anymore. So could be something. Again, this is one of the things I really like about the Battle Brothers perk system, is the perks tend to be interesting enough that you can figure out ways to make them good, even if they aren't good all of the time. But my problem with dodge is it seems to be bad in most of the scenarios when I would care about it, and not useful in a lot of scenarios. So who knows? Maybe you guys will change my mind on it, but I have not found dodge to be useful personally, so I give it a 5. All right, fortified mind. I read this initially, and Iron Will was not swayed from the true path. Easily resolves, increased by 25%. I didn't think very much of this to begin with, but the more I play, the more I like this. I use this on 2 sets of classes. I use this on my Mega Tanks, and I use this on my Bannerman. The Bannerman goes kind of without saying. The people who are going to be using Rally are going to want to max resolve. They max resolve so they can rally your troops versus fear-style attacks like Geist. You don't need those all of the time, but when you do need them, you need to have super high resolve. Of course, it makes sense to build it on this, but I also really like this on my tank characters. My tank characters are designed to run into really shitty situations where they're being often surrounded by enemies or getting attacked multiple times per turn by a number of pikes. Like I use them a lot versus undead to like hold an entire flank where like you'll have like 4 undead like shield guys next to you and then like a layer of pikes behind them all attacking a single guy. And resolve is super, super important there. Remember, every time your guy if your guy is engaged by one enemy, each additional enemy who walks up to him causes a resolve check. And what this means is that you can, if you're by yourself and you're getting, and why it matters if you're by yourself is because that way you have so many more tiles around you that you can be surrounded from. You're gonna roll something like 3 or 4 resolve checks by people just moving next to you. And it's really important to pass those resolve checks, because if you don't, every single time you don't, you're losing 10% of your melee defense, which means you're taking a ton more damage. I use this versus orcs, of the same thing, where I throw my mega tank surrounding by like 3 or 4 orcs, and the orcs bash him around all the time, but they can't really hurt him because he's got a ton of defense. Well, to keep him at a ton of defense, I need a ton of resolve, and I really, really like Fortified Mind for that. So I use this on a couple builds, and I find it very powerful when I use those. I give this a 2. I think it's pretty damn good on the builds that it uses. But again, in the same way that Executioner and Bullseye are really specific, I don't take Fortified Mind on very many types of builds, but the builds I do use it on, it's very, very good on. All right, Holdout. I think Holdout is probably the second worst skill in the game, only better than 9 lives. Holdout is, I give it a 5 if that wasn't clear. What happens is you don't trigger injuries until the fight ends. So if you're hit and receive an injury, you receive that injury, but it doesn't take effect until after the fight. This would be useful in a scenario. Yeah, see, that's the problem, right? Is when is that useful? Of course, it would be nice if you didn't take. I mean, it's always, in some sense, it's always nice not to take the fact of the wounds, right? You don't want to have whatever that wound effect is, and it would be nice not to have that till the end. But the problem is the opportunity cost. The wounds are random. A lot of wounds that you get affected with really don't cause any problems to you. If you're a ranged character, you don't care about melee defense most of the time. You don't care about melee skill. You might not care about, on a lot of characters, you may not care about initiative. They're already so slow that a little bit of initiative hit's not going to be an issue. On a melee character, you may not care if you got a broken eye socket or you lose some vision range or something like that. A lot of the effects that you're going to be taking anyways aren't that big a deal, and because most of the time it's going to be random which effects you get, you can't really predict that. It seems very, very expensive to be devoting an entire perk to that. And the other problem I have with Holdout is it's hard to imagine a scenario where it would be super critical. I have seen some people try to take advantage of riposte and use like isolated guys who are like fighting back like with a sword and are dealing with lots of attacks, and in which case if they lost melee defense they would just instantly die. But I don't play that way. I've found that isolated guys are almost always a liability as opposed to a benefit, that most of the way that this game plays is about using your formations and your guys together as efficiently as possible, which means that I don't have these guys who it's do or die if they get a wound. So I don't like this skill. I just find it's not worth the perk point for me. There's much better skills to be taken. All right, next up is Steel Brow. I'm going to give Steel Brow a 3 out of 5. In my earlier playthroughs, I used Steel Brow on basically everybody. I've since kind of weaned myself off of that, and again, because it's the opportunity cost argument, I would rather have more and better perks than Steel Brow on certain builds. I still use Steel Brow, and on the builds I use it, I don't love it, but it's a safety measure. It's insurance for those builds. I use this on megas and archers. It's actually really good on archers, and it's okay on megas, and let's talk about why. So, what does Steel Brow do? Well, in this game, when you're hit in the head, and everybody has a base 25% chance to hit you in the head, and a number of weapons have added effects to do that, and some of the more scary opponents, like Master Archers, have an ability called Headhunter, which means every time they attack, they get an increased chance to hit the head if they didn't hit the head, so you will get hit in the head sooner or later. Head damage, when it hits you, it does an additional 50% health damage, although not an additional 50% damage to your armor. So it only does the crit portion of that. When you get hit in the head, it counts as a crit. The crit portion only applies extra damage to the actual health points. Head injuries are particularly nasty. There are different types of injuries on the torso versus the head. Head injuries are really nasty. They can really knock your guys out of the fight entirely. They can do things like minus 50% to all your stats or whatnot. And taking damage to the head like that can kill your guys very, very quickly. If they get hit in the head a couple times, they might die, even if they are pretty healthy guys, because of that crit damage. So this removes that extra bit of crit damage on the guys who are going to be hit the hardest. Those being my megas, who are in positions where they're always going to be hit all the time. And if they're going to be in positions they're going to be hit all the time, I want them to be able to survive a couple lucky headshots. I don't want to lose my guys on that. But the rest of my guys are generally mobile enough, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. I run a lot of rotation, for example, where if they get hit in the head once, they're going to survive. It's going to be annoying. They're probably going to take a wound, but it's probably not the end of the day. I can rotate them to safety or get them out of there in some way where it's not such a big deal. With the megas, I can't. The megas are almost always in situations where it's do or die for them. So Steel Brow becomes a lot more important to protect them from getting just kind of RNG'd down by some lucky headshots. Archers are a slightly different story. I run Steel Brow on archers because archers require sight. In this game, the more effective the helmet, the stronger the helmet, the more sight it takes away from you. So archers have to wear light helmets to keep good range, because if they lose too much sight, they lose too much range. And what I found for my archers, if I don't run Steel Brow, enemies getting lucky with a couple headshots will sometimes kill my very high level, high value archers, and I don't want that. So I use this as a safety measure for both of those builds. It's not good on either of those builds in the sense that it is a perk that a lot of the times does nothing. A lot of times when I get hit, it's in the chest, it does nothing. A lot of times I get hit once in the head, that wouldn't really have mattered, it does nothing. But sometimes it saves my guys from dying, and it does it consistently enough, or rather when I don't take it, I die somewhat consistently to multiple headshots, that I found it to be useful on those builds. So not the strongest of perks, but I like it on certain builds. All right, quick hands. I give quick hands a 2. And it's borderline 2 in 1. And what it comes down to for me, quick hands allows you to make one item interaction for free per turn with no cost to action points. And normally an item interaction costs you 4 action points. If you want to pull a shield from your inventory to your shield arm, costs you 4 action points. You want to put a shield from your shield arm onto the ground, costs you 4 action points. With quick hands, you can do one of those interactions per turn at the cost of 0 action points. I use this on all of my classes that are going to be regularly changing weapons. That would be like duelists who also use a shield. So duelists who swap the shield out and in for defensive versus offensive bonuses. I use this on my hybrids who are going to be switching between shields, pikes, and crossbows. I use this on... I've tried two-handed builds that also use a shield for that. I use this on anybody who wants to use a throwing weapon or like a net or acid vials or any of this stuff. I'm going to want to use quick hands if I can. I like it I like it for those scenarios. In the scenario where I want to get that extra damage from switching weapons in the same turn or get the extra defense, it's very, very, very good. For everybody else, it's mostly just it's something that's probably not worth the opportunity cost. Like if I'm going to dagger somebody down, yeah, it'd be great if I could quick hands for that turn, but it's not that great. It's not as good as having another perk that would be even better. So I like it for the specific builds that it's going to be good for, but it isn't good on a lot of builds. It's kind of good in some very short list of specific builds, but it's pretty damn good on those. So I give it a 2. It's fairly defining for a lot of builds, like the hybrid builds. All right, next up, Gifted. Gifted for me is, I give it a 2 again. Gifted is almost identical to Colossus for me. I like Gifted for this reason. So I've gotten a lot of pushback on my streams from a number of you guys. But here's my logic on Gifted. This game is often about finding the best characters you can get. And those characters almost always have very high rolls. So when you pick a class has a range of rolls that it can have. It has a range of how much melee defense it can have. It has a range of how much melee offense it can have. And then when you pick up that class guy, he's basically rolled for those numbers. So he's rolled inside that range. And what you're trying to do in this game as much as possible is find the guys who rolled high on their ranges and find the backgrounds that naturally start high. So you want a good background with a lucky roll. That's what you're doing. And why are you doing that? Because it makes your that character then becomes better than the other available characters at doing some task, hitting things in melee, surviving in melee, having good fatigue, having good health, whatever it happens to be. That's kind of what they're doing. Gifted gives you more stat points. Stat points are something you use pretty much every single round, often multiple times around. Whenever you attack, you're rolling your melee attack versus a defense score. Whenever you defend, you're rolling your defense score versus their attack score, etc. Especially when it comes to the attacking and defending, the endpoints matter on this. If my opponent has a 10% chance to hit me because my melee defense is so good, if I get 3 more melee defense, that isn't the difference. That's not 3% better. That brings my opponent's chance to hit me from a 10 to a 7%. That's basically a 30% increase in melee defense with 3 more stat points if my opponent has 10% chance to hit me. And likewise, when I'm trying to hit my opponent, if I have a 90, so the game caps at 5% miss and at 95% hit. Those are your caps. Either way, you can't go above them. But if my character has a 90% chance to hit something, and I give him three more attack points, so he goes from 90% chance to hit to a 93% chance to hit, it's not 3% better. It's the difference between missing 10% of the time and missing 2% of the time. Or rather, from 10% to 7%, right? That increase is often better than the numbers represented there straight off the bat. Okay, so that's my first argument for gifted. Gifted is, so on good characters. I mean, there's no argument about gifted on shitty characters. On shitty characters, gifted is an instant pickup because the shitty characters have such low stats that you're probably not going to be in your ranks for very long. You need them to do something while they're in your ranks. You don't really care about their level 11 builds because they're not going to get to level 11 because you're not going to have them. Pick up early, easy stats. But on your good characters, I still recommend gifted if you can fit it in. And this is one of the ones that I don't always manage to fit into my builds, but when I can, I would really like to, because what I've just talked about in terms of the approaching the end values for attacks and defense, and then also because you don't have enough stats to go around. And this is the argument that I use with Colossus. So oftentimes on a character, you want to raise melee defense, melee offense, and fatigue, and you want a little bit of resolve in there, and sometimes a little bit of range defense. You often just don't have enough stats to go around. You're going to have to make sacrifices and compromises, and you really would prefer not to do that. You really would like to max out your attack values and defense value as much as you possibly can, because those are the ones that are going to be important across the course of the game, but you need to have some basic level of resolve, some basic level of HP, some basic level of fatigue. These are just pure stat points that are poured into it. What is the difference between a good background and a bad background in this game? Stat points. What is the difference between a good roll and a bad roll inside a background? Stat points. What does gifted give you? Stat points. I have a very hard time not wanting to take this on everybody, and I try to fit this in as many builds as I can. I can't always fit it in, but it seems to me to be very, very powerful, much more power than I would say that many people give it credit for. So I'm sure there'll be some pushback on that. I look forward to your comments. I look forward to the discussion on that. We'll have to see as we get going. All right, let's talk about the level 4 perks. Backstabber. I give Backstabber a 2. I only use Backstabber on 2 builds. I use these on my hybrids and I use this on my bannerman. And I think this is an incredible bonus. What does Backstabber do? Normally, every time for every adjacent ally to a target. So if there's a target, and there's 2 of your friends are by it, and you're by it, that means there's 2 people who aren't you by it. You get plus 5% per guy. So you're getting plus 10 to hit that guy. If you're a pikeman and you're in the back, that's plus 10. If you're just a front line guy and it's you and one other guy, it's only plus 5. Backstabber doubles that bonus. So if I have an opponent and I've got 2 of my allies next to him and I'm a pikeman in the back, I get normally plus 10. If I have Backstabber, I'm going to be getting plus 20 to hit him. That's incredible. That's a ton of accuracy at the cost for 1 perk point. I'm basically getting 10 melee accuracy out of this for 1 perk point. So I build this on my bannerman because I don't raise attack skill very often on my bannerman because I have to raise resolve, range defense, and often HP or fatigue. So I very rarely can afford to raise attack skill on a bannerman. And I want max attack skill on my pikeman. I want my pikeman to have enough attack skill that they can hit a guy with a shield consistently, and that means I just need to shove as much attack skill in there as I can get. I love Backstabber, but I only like it on those builds. I want at least 2 people near my target to take advantage of Backstabber, and that to me seems to be pikes to do that. I can't guarantee that on frontliners. A lot of times it's just going to be you and another frontliner next to a guy, which means you'd only get plus 5, and if you get Backstabber, you only get another plus 5, which means it's only a value of 5, where normally it's a value of 10 for pikemen at least, and sometimes more if you're surrounding a target. I love the ability, but it's very specific to certain builds. I think it's a very efficient use of a perk point for a very large number of stats, and particularly the most important stat of all, which is accuracy, or one of the most important stats. All right, anticipation. I give this a 1. This is probably my go-to range defense skill. I use this on all of my archers and all of my hybrids and my bannermen. And I use this because it is the most effective way to build up defenses versus ranged attacks. The way it works is you get, if you have, let's say you have a ranged defense of 20 and you're 7 tiles away, you gain 7 plus 70% of 20. So you get a lot of range defense based on the distance. The downside of anticipation is it is based on the distance. As enemies get closer to you, the bonus it gives you is less, and it only takes into account your base range defense. So if you have a shield, anticipation doesn't really combo with shields at all. There's separate bonuses to add, don't get me wrong, but it's not taking the value of the shield and applying anticipation to that. It's taking your base value and applying anticipation to that. So this is really good for long range fights, like basically all your starting fights of archers versus brigands, although it gets scarier as brigands move towards you. If the crossbows ever run towards you, especially the noble crossbows ever run towards you, it's a little bit scarier. And versus goblins where you're at max range, it's also good, although they'll move towards you too. This is my go-to for keeping my archers and my back ranks safe from enemy ranged fire. I really like this ability. I strongly recommend it. Shield Expert. I give this a 3. Again, it's situational and it's not that great, but it has a similar argument as Gifted to me. So I use this on my mega tanks and on some of my frontline builds. Not all of them, but some of them. And what I like about this is it's a way of min-maxing your melee defense. So again, so what does it do? It gives you 25% of the shield's value in melee defense and range defense. It makes the shield be harder to kill with axes, and it increases the value of your shield wall skill. Is what it does. Is the 3 things it does. I don't really care too much about the increase in value of the shield wall. I mean, I do, but I don't use shield wall all that often, so it isn't super useful for that. Making it harder to kill with axes, I care about a little bit. I don't care about it most of the time, because if I'm fighting orcs, I'll just bring 2 shields, and I kind of like it when they attack my shields, because if they attack my shields, it's damage that can never do damage to me. It does put my guy to be more vulnerable if they kill the shield, but every attack they spend attacking a shield is not an attack they spend attacking my character, which is really nice. So mostly I don't care if they break my shields, but on certain class builds, particularly my mega tanks, I really want them to not have their shields broken. With my mega tanks, I will often bring an orc shield into the fight, specifically because it has 1,000,000 health on it, and then I'll also take Shield Expert. So if they choose to kill that shield, it's going to take them forever, and my guy won't become vulnerable because of that. What I like about shield defense is the extra defense values that you're getting out of it. That's what I primarily take this for, and this is again by that rationale. If my opponents have an 80% chance to hit me, or let's just do the 90 again, right? If my opponents have a 10% chance to hit me, rather, I have a 90% chance to evade. If I can get 3 or 5 more defense out of that, which is what I'll get by taking Shield Wall, it's basically having their accuracy to hit me or something, or depends on what those values are. But in some of my playthroughs, I've gotten tanks with over 80 melee defense, and that's because they've taken Gifted and Shield Expert, and they have 3-star melee defense, and they picked up a legendary shield with a little bit more than the normal heater shield's worth of melee defense, and I've leveled melee defense every single level. And that means you're starting to min-max the absolute extreme of what you can get for a character's defense. And when you hit those values, these characters become incredible. So I really like pushing those values to the extreme limits, because I think the points on the extreme are worth more than the points in the middle. And I think Shield Wall is another one of the ways I can play with that. All right, Brawny I give a 1. I consider this pretty much essential on every build except basically archers. It's stamina back, or another way of looking at this is it allows you to wear heavier gear than you'd normally be able to wear. I for me basically have break points where I'm like, I want this much stamina on a character, and if I can't get that much stamina, I have to lower his armor values, and this means I have to make that trade-off much less. I can still wear fairly heavy armor on pretty much all of my guys because I level fatigue a lot, and I take Brawny. This is an incredible ability. I really strongly recommend it on pretty much everybody. A rotation. This may be the best ability in the game. I'm going to hear some argument about it. People are going to want to tell me about damage skills. People love Berserk, but I think rotation is probably the best ability in the game. This is a clear 1 for me. I take it on everybody who's ever going to be on the front line. All of my two-handers take it. All of my duelists take it. All of my shield bros take it. They all take rotation because rotation saves lives. And having everybody have it saves lives much more consistently than just having a few guys take it. This means that if something stupid happens, one of my guys gets hit in the head 3 times in a row and he's like on death's door about to fucking die here. He's basically dead on the next attack. I can rotate him out. If an orc charges through my lines twice or 3, the stupid orc charge that knocks you back, and then he does it again and knocks you back, and suddenly one of my archers is next to that orc. Well, I just have somebody else approach the archer and rotate the archer out. And because so many of my guys have rotate, it makes it a much more consistent occurrence that I can do that. This is going to, I take this in the early game, I take this in front of brawny. Even on my base troops, my basic shield bros, it's going to be a point here, somewhere in one of these, and then I immediately pick up rotate. Because as soon as I get rotate, I can control who's going to die. In this game, your armor is your guys start with full armor in a fight, and as the fight goes on, their armor is being worn down. You can't ever recover that armor, which means that people's health is a finite resource across the course of a fight. There's nothing you can do to increase that health total once the fight has started. There's no healing in this game. There's no armor repair game. What this means is that the only way you can guarantee that somebody's going to be safe in a high-risk position where they're likely to be hit is to make sure they have enough armor to survive that. Since you can't replenish armor, the only way you can do that is to cycle unwounded guys into that. So this is super good for farming armor off opponents because, for example, let's say they have a branded leader who you really want his armor, but he's doing a lot of damage, and it's too early in the game. When your guys can't stand there and take his damage forever, they're going to die to that. Well, you have him take his damage for 2 turns, and you rotate in a fresh guy, and he takes the damage for 2 turns. And you rotate in another fresh guy, and he takes the damage for 2 turns. And by that point, you can actually dagger him down and kill him without losing anybody, but having set up to get the gear that you want for advancement. I can't get over how good this ability is. It's expensive. It's 25 to rotate. You try not to use it when you don't have to. You don't want to use it for repositioning that often, and especially in the early game. But it saves lives, and it keeps your guys alive and well in it. It's just so good in so many scenarios. It also is a damage increase, which is kind of a weird one. Especially when you're fighting things like Necro Savants or any of the really fast enemies that you can't reposition on your own by moving around. This will allow you to switch guys in to fight them more efficiently. For example, you can have a two-hander take a swing. It costs him 6 action points. He's got 3 action points left. You can then rotate him out to rotate another guy in to fight. That uses all 9 of your action points on the two-hander and brings another guy in like a duelist who doesn't want to move at all before he attacks. Then he can attack twice with 8 action points. It's very, very efficient for if you care about damage in a very short fight. If you care about damage more than fatigue, it's a very efficient way of getting people in range. You have a two-hander who's not in range, you run a tank into the spot, and then you rotate the tank back to swap the two-hander in, and now the two-hander who couldn't travel 2 tiles to get there essentially traveled 2 tiles. He traveled 1 tile on his own, and then he got rotated 1 tile by another guy. So you can get damage on that round. So this is another way of applying burst damage. I use it a lot versus Necro Savants, a little bit versus like Wolves, stuff like this. So not only a survivability skill, but also a damage skill. Absolutely incredible. I strongly recommend that on pretty much everybody. All right, moving on. Rally the troops. This is a 1. This is a unbelievably powerful ability, but it's only useful on 1 build. Maybe 2 builds, but really 1 build. What does it do? There's 2 things it does. The first thing it does is it gives a chance to rally troops from a lower morale level to a higher morale level. So if you are at wavering or breaking, you can be raised 1 level. So you can go up to either wavering or up to steady. The impact of that ability is based on distance. So the closer your guy who's doing the rally is to the target that you want to go up a resolve level, the more of a chance it has to do it. It's based on the resolve skill of the guy using rally. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. You don't want your guys wavering or breaking versus enemies because you have minus defense and minus offense bonuses while that's happening. That's okay, but you don't use it for that too much. Mostly what you're using this for is to take people who are fleeing and bringing them from fleeing to another morale level, like wavering or breaking. And that's important because when a character's fleeing, you lose control of him, and he will run through opponents' zones of control and take a ton of damage. This is the number one way you lose people versus zombies, for example, is Geist fear you, your guys break. When your guy breaks, he runs away from a zombie. The zombie who normally only has 1 attack a turn and doesn't do a lot of damage suddenly gets 4 attacks that turn, and all of his buddies get extra attacks as well, and your guy kills himself in 1 round. So you have to have rally troops, especially versus the fear effects in this game. The fear effects are Geists mostly, but also the undead priests have fear effects. And then, of course, anytime you take rally checks anyways from things like, the Orc Warlord also has a fear effect in his shout as well. So there's a number of fights where you need a guy who has rally and has the ability to give your guys extra resolve in the game. And this is the only ability that really fills that role pretty much. So it's a necessary and really powerful ability. It's just you're not going to build that on very many people at all. I like to bring 2 rallymen to some of the harder fear fights. like versus a ton of zombies and geists, or versus a ton of undead priests or something like that. I like to have 2 guys with rally in my group, but I don't like to have more than 2 guys with rally in the entire, of my 20, I only want 2 guys with this ability. All right, final one we're going to do this video. Taunt. Let's talk about Taunt. Taunt, I give a 3. I really love it. I maybe shouldn't even make that. I take that back. I give it a 2. I just changed my ranking thinking about this, because it's again, it's a weird thing to think about how good is an ability on a particular build. With that build, how defining and how important is this ability? I use Taunt on one class. I use Taunt on my mega tanks. I've already talked about how Taunt can be used to control like brigand leaders while you're farming their armor, but it's also a really strong ability for fighting a number of different opponents. It's great versus orcs. You can keep the orcs from killing squishy targets that they've charged onto. You can keep the orcs from shield walling by forcing them to make offensive actions with Taunt. This is really good versus undead pikemen, who you can stop them from hitting squishier targets and make them attack your guy with the highest melee defense. This is really good for preventing the undead warriors with the shields, stops them from shield walling again. This is really good for high enemy damage dealers like knights, like sergeants, like brigand leaders, like hedge knights. Anything that is a really scary attack that you don't want it hitting a guy who has okay melee defense, especially if the guy's at low health. You'd rather have him hit someone with super high melee defense. This is when this is useful. It helps you farm enemies. It helps you keep guys alive. It helps you kill guys faster by not letting them use their defensive abilities. It allows you to be less concerned about positioning. It's not suddenly a death sentence if somebody gets on top of one of your archers, because even if you can't kill that guy immediately, you can taunt him for a couple rounds so he can't attack the archer. This is just a really, really good control ability on a class, I use it on megas who don't do damage. The downside of Taunt is it takes action points to use. I believe it's 4 action points to use. It might be 5, but I think it's 4. Actually, I know it's 4 because you can use it twice in a turn, and it costs you 15 stamina. That's a fair amount of stamina and a fair amount of action points, and you can't attack while you're doing that because it takes you those action points to do it. So you could only taunt once and attack once, or taunt twice and attack 0 times. So you really want it on somebody who doesn't do much attacking. And I run a build. I run a build that does almost no attacking, so he can that build can use its stamina to taunt. But the impact it has, for me anyways, I've felt has been more than the impact it would have been if I had just one more guy able to attack. This allows me to do things that I wouldn't be able to do without this ability. If you haven't played with Taunt, I really recommend you either watch some of my videos with it to check it out, or check it out for yourself and just really get a sense of how good Taunt is. I think this is a really incredible ability. The downside is there are scenarios where Taunt won't be useful. In just a generic fight, sometimes there just won't be a time to use Taunt. You'd rather have just killed them. So there are times when it's not the best thing ever to have, but as a whole, I really, really like this ability for the tactical flexibility it gives my group. All right, guys, this was the end of video number 2. I'm kind of glad. These are going longer than I thought they're going to go, but I'm having a lot of fun doing them. I'm really hoping you guys are getting some information from this. I am realizing as I go through this how important it's going to be that I give you the build sheets and I give you talk through the builds that I have as we're watching these. So I'll try to get those videos coming out roughly at the same time these videos are coming out, so you can reference some of the builds that I'm talking about, so that some of the conversation we're having here is going to be a little bit more understandable. But anyways, please leave your comments below. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.